I want to start with a sentence that the governor of the Banque de France said on March 24, 2026, when he announced that France had completed the withdrawal of its entire gold reserve from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He said the decision was, and I am quoting directly, not politically motivated. France had simply decided to consolidate its gold in Paris because higher quality bars are traded on the European market. A practical financial decision, nothing more. And I want you to hold that sentence in your mind for the next 20 minutes. Because by the time I am finished walking you through what France actually did, what Germany and Italy are being pressured to do right now, and what a French president named Charles de Gaulle did with this exact same playbook 60 years ago that directly caused the collapse of the Bretton Woods monetary system and forced Nixon to close the gold window in 1971, you will understand why the phrase "not politically motivated" is the most politically loaded statement a central bank governor has made in this decade. France just pulled 129 tons of gold from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It generated $13 billion in profit doing so. Every ounce of French gold, all 2,337 tons of it, is now sitting in La Souterraine, the Banque de France's underground vault south of Paris. Germany has 1,236 tons still in New York, worth approximately $100 billion, and German politicians and economists are now publicly saying that gold is no longer safe in the Fed's vaults. Italy has 43% of its entire reserve in U.S. custody, and the same pressure is building in Rome. Combined, Germany and Italy alone have $245 billion in gold sitting in a building on Liberty Street in Manhattan. And the question every investor who holds gold, every investor who holds dollars, and every investor who has a retirement account denominated in the currency that the Federal Reserve manages should be asking is not whether France's decision was politically motivated. The question is, what happens to the dollar, to gold prices, and to the entire architecture of the post-war monetary system if Germany and Italy follow France out the door? I have watched how the confidence in reserve currency systems erodes across monetary history for over 40 years. And what I am going to show you today is not speculation. It is a pattern that France has already run once before. And the last time France ran it, the world's monetary system collapsed. Subscribe now. Here is the mechanism and the history that most financial media coverage of the French repatriation has completely missed. Write this down because the historical parallel is not an analogy. It is a blueprint. The year is 1963. Charles de Gaulle is president of France. The Bretton Woods system is the monetary architecture of the world. Under Bretton Woods, the US dollar is the global reserve currency, pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Every other currency is pegged to the dollar, and every foreign government that holds dollars has the contractual right to walk up to the U.S. Treasury and exchange those dollars for physical gold at the fixed rate. It is a promise. The United States made it in 1944 at the Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire, and every nation that signed the Bretton Woods Agreement accepted it as the foundation of the post-war monetary order. De Gaulle did not believe the promise would hold. His economic advisor, Jacques Rueff, had been arguing since the 1950s that the United States was running a structural deficit that it was financing by printing dollars, and that the promise of dollar-to-gold convertibility at $35 per ounce was mathematically unsustainable. The United States was spending more than it produced. The Vietnam War was accelerating that spending, and the number of dollars in foreign hands was growing faster than the gold in Fort Knox. De Gaulle drew the obvious conclusion. If the promise was going to break, France should collect on it before it broke, rather than after. Between 1963 and 1966, the Banque de France systematically converted its dollar reserves into gold at the $35 per ounce fixed rate, repatriating over 3,300 tons of physical metal from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and the Bank of England. France was not alone. Belgium, the Netherlands, and West Germany all made similar moves. But France was the most systematic, the most deliberate, and the most public about its intention. In 1965, de Gaulle held a press conference and said directly that the gold exchange standard was the only monetary system with no mark of discrimination against any particular country. That the dollar's privilege as the reserve currency was exorbitant. That countries should not be required to finance American deficits by accepting American paper. The words were diplomatic, the action was not. France was running a controlled bank run on the Federal Reserve, demanding physical gold in exchange for paper dollars before the paper dollars lost their gold backing. On August 15, 1971, 8 years after France began its repatriation, Richard Nixon closed the gold window. No more gold for dollars at any price. The Bretton Woods system was over. The promise was broken exactly as de Gaulle's advisor had predicted it would be. And France, which had collected its gold at $35 per ounce before the window closed, held physical metal rather than paper promises when the system collapsed. The investors and nations that held their dollar reserves did not. This is not ancient history. It is the playbook that the Banque de France just ran again in 2025 and 2026, not at $35 per ounce, at $4,700 to $5,000 per ounce, with the same logic, with the same conclusion, and with the same implication for what comes next. Now let me give you the specific facts of what France did in 2025 and 2026, because the details matter enormously for understanding both why they did it and what it signals. The Banque de France held 129 tons of gold at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. This gold dated from the post-war period, stored in Manhattan, for the same reason every European nation stored gold in New York after 1945. The United States was the dominant military and economic power. Its vaults were safe from Soviet aggression. The dollar was as good as gold because of Bretton Woods. All three of those reasons have been complicated by events that have accumulated over the last several years. In 2024, an internal audit of the Banque de France recommended replacing the New York gold, which was older and did not meet current London good delivery standards, with modern compliant bars. The bank executed the replacement between July 2025 and January 2026 through a series of 26 transactions. Rather than physically shipping the old bars from New York to Paris, which would have been logistically complex and expensive, France sold the New York gold at current market prices and purchased an equivalent tonnage of modern London good delivery bars from European central banks and bullion dealers, storing the new bars in La Souterraine. The result was a profit of nearly $13 billion on the transaction. The exceptional foreign exchange income totaled $11 billion in 2025 alone, turning the Banque de France from a $7.7 billion loss in 2024 to an $8.1 billion net profit in 2025. Every ounce of French gold is now on French soil. The governor of the Banque de France announced these results on March 24, 2026, and described them as a practical financial decision. And technically, every word of that description is accurate. The gold needed to be upgraded. The European market offered compliant bars. The profit was generated by favorable market conditions. All true. But here is what the governor did not say. The internal audit that recommended the upgrade was conducted in 2024. The operation began in July 2025. It was completed in January 2026, 6 weeks before US and Israeli strikes on Iran began on February 28. France completed the withdrawal of its last gold from US custody, generating $13 billion in the process, and then 6 weeks later, France's president called the American strikes outside the framework of international law, pushed aggressively for a ceasefire, and positioned France as distinct from the American approach to the Iran conflict. The Banque de France governor said the decision was not politically motivated, and I am going to accept that statement at face value, while noting that the timing, the completion of French gold withdrawal from American custody 6 weeks before France's most significant public break with American foreign policy since de Gaulle, is a data point that every investor should hold in their analysis. Now let me tell you what this means for Germany and Italy, because France is the completed transaction. Germany and Italy are the pending ones. And the pending transactions are where the story becomes structurally significant for global monetary markets in a way that the French repatriation at 129 tons is not. Germany holds the world's second largest gold reserve, 3,352 tons in total. Of that total, 1,236 tons, approximately 37%, are stored at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. At current gold prices of approximately $4,761 per ounce, those 1,236 tons represent approximately $100 billion in value, sitting in a vault on Liberty Street in Manhattan. In January 2026, Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, chair of the European Parliament's Committee on Security and Defense, made a public statement. In times of growing geopolitical uncertainty and amid the unpredictability of U.S. President Trump's policies, there is no longer any basis for 37% of Germany's gold reserves to be stored in the vaults of the Federal Reserve in New York. Emanuel Munk, former head of the Bundesbank's own research department, said Germany's central bank should examine returning the reserves. The Taxpayers Association of Europe issued a formal letter to Germany's finance ministry and central bank urging action. Michael Jaeger, the association's president, told the Rheinische Post directly, "Trump is unpredictable and he does everything to generate revenue. That is why our gold is no longer safe in the Fed's vaults." Italy's situation is even more structurally exposed. Italy holds the world's third largest gold reserve at 2,152 tons. 43% of that reserve is in the United States. At current prices, Italy's U.S.-held gold is worth approximately $100 billion. Italian economic commentators have been publicly arguing that leaving 43% of Italy's gold reserves in America under the current political climate is dangerous for the national interest. The combined value of German and Italian gold in U.S. custody is approximately $245 billion. That is not a small position. It is not a rounding error in the global gold market. It is the kind of quantity whose movement, if it occurs, reshapes the supply and demand dynamics of the physical gold market in ways that the paper price on the COMEX futures exchange cannot fully absorb. And the catalyst that is making German and Italian politicians and economists say these things out loud in January 2026 is the same catalyst that drove France to complete its withdrawal, not Trump's trade policy specifically, not the Iran war specifically. The event that made storing gold in U.S. custody feel like a strategic vulnerability rather than a strategic asset. That event happened in February 2022. Here is the event that changed everything, and this is the part of the story that mainstream financial coverage is consistently failing to connect to the gold repatriation trend. On February 26, 2022, 4 days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States and its allies froze approximately $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves. The reserves were held predominantly in dollar-denominated assets in Western financial institutions. They were frozen, not seized, not destroyed, but made inaccessible to their owner by executive order and regulatory action. A sovereign nation's central bank reserves, accumulated over decades as a buffer against economic shocks, evaporated overnight as a functional asset, not because of a market movement, not because of a credit event, because of a political decision made in Washington and Brussels. Every central bank manager in the world received the same lesson from that event simultaneously. Dollar-denominated assets held in Western custody are not reserves. They are contingent assets, assets that remain yours as long as your government's relationship with Washington remains acceptable, assets that can become hostages the moment that relationship deteriorates. For Germany and Italy, two countries whose entire post-war financial relationship with the United States was built on the assumption of permanent alliance and mutual trust, the Russian reserve freeze was not an abstract precedent. It was a demonstration of the mechanism by which their own reserves, including the gold they store in New York, could theoretically be made inaccessible in a scenario that seemed unthinkable before February 2022 and seems somewhat less unthinkable after the geopolitical disruptions of the 2025 and 2026 period. The German politician who says Trump is unpredictable and that is why our gold is no longer safe in the Fed's vaults is not making a conspiratorial argument. He is making a risk management argument, and the risk he is managing is the same risk that every central bank reserve manager in the world began managing the day the Russian reserves were frozen. The risk that dollar-denominated assets, including gold stored in dollar-denominated institutions, carry political counterparty risk that physical gold stored domestically does not carry. Gold in La Souterraine cannot be frozen by executive order. Gold in a Federal Reserve vault technically can be made inaccessible to its owner if the political will exists to do so. France decided that distinction was worth acting on. Germany and Italy are deciding whether France was right. Now let me be specific about what the historical pattern says happens to gold prices when a significant repatriation wave begins. Because France's 129 tons, while meaningful in isolation, is not the number that matters for the structural gold thesis. The number that matters is what happens if Germany's 1,236 tons begin moving, and the mechanism by which that movement affects gold prices is more complex and more powerful than most retail investors understand. When Germany repatriated 674 tons of gold between 2013 and 2017, the process took 4 years. The Bundesbank moved the gold in small increments, coordinating with the Federal Reserve to avoid market disruption. The gold was transported physically over that 4-year period, and the process was deliberately slow specifically to avoid creating supply and demand imbalances in the physical gold market. The reason the process required 4 years to avoid market disruption tells you something important about the sensitivity of the physical gold market to large tonnage movements. If Germany were to announce a full repatriation of its 1,236 tons in U.S. custody, the immediate effect would not be on COMEX paper gold futures, which are a financial instrument that can be settled in cash. The immediate effect would be on the physical gold market, specifically on the London Bullion Market Association, where physical metal changes hands between central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and institutional buyers. The LBMA is estimated to have daily trading volumes of approximately $30 billion, but the actual physical gold sitting in London clearing facilities available for immediate delivery is a fraction of the notional value traded. When very large tonnage requests for physical delivery hit the LBMA simultaneously, the premium of physical gold over paper gold widens. The COMEX paper price becomes increasingly disconnected from the price at which actual metal changes hands, and the physical premium, the extra cost of obtaining real metal rather than a financial claim to metal, rises. This physical premium dynamic is already visible in the data for 2025 and 2026. Central banks have been buying 900 tons annually. COMEX vault drainage has been elevated, and the spread between paper gold and physical gold delivery prices has been widening throughout this period. A German repatriation announcement would add a demand shock to the physical market that the paper price cannot fully absorb. The price discovery for actual metal would move higher, even as the paper futures markets attempted to process the information through normal supply and demand adjustments. This is not a theoretical scenario. It is the mechanism that has operated every time a large sovereign buyer has moved physical gold at scale. And Germany's 1,236 tons is a very large scale. Let me close with the 2 questions that I think matter most for every investor watching this story develop, because the French repatriation is the data point that confirms the trend is real, not theoretical. The first question is whether Germany will formally announce a repatriation program. The signals from German politicians and economists are the strongest they have been since 2013, when the Bundesbank announced its previous repatriation program under public pressure. The Bundesbank officially says no formal plan is under consideration. But the Bundesbank also said that in 2012, 18 months before the 2013 announcement, the gap between official central bank language and eventual central bank action in this area has historically been measured in months, not years. Watch the Bundesbank's quarterly statements on reserve management. When the language shifts from no formal plan to examining all options, the announcement follows within 6 to 12 months. The second question is the one that connects Germany's 1,236 tons to your gold position directly. If Germany announces a repatriation program and the Bundesbank begins requesting physical delivery from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the Federal Reserve's ability to deliver that gold without disrupting the physical market depends on whether the gold it holds for foreign central banks is actually available in the form and quantity those central banks believe it to be. In 2013, when Germany began its repatriation, the Federal Reserve returned gold bars that had been freshly cast rather than the original bars that Germany had deposited. The Bundesbank confirmed this publicly and explained that refining was a normal part of the process. Some analysts found that explanation less than fully satisfying. There is no confirmed evidence that the Federal Reserve does not hold the gold it claims to hold for foreign central banks, but there is also no independent audit of those holdings by the claiming nations. And when Germany asked to inspect its gold before the 2013 repatriation, the Federal Reserve did not permit inspection of the specific bars attributed to German ownership. There are 2 types of investors watching the French repatriation announcement: and the German and Italian pressure campaign that followed it. The first type reads the Banque de France governor's statement that the decision was not politically motivated and concludes that the story is about gold bar, quality standards, and European accounting practices. They do not see the de Gaulle parallel. They do not connect the 2022 Russian reserve freeze to the German politicians saying the Fed's vaults are no longer safe. They do not track the Bundesbank's quarterly language on reserve management. And they will discover the connection between European gold repatriation and the physical gold market when Germany's announcement arrives and the premium between physical metal and paper gold futures reaches levels they did not anticipate. The second type of investor understands that France just ran the de Gaulle playbook at 4,761 per ounce, that Germany is being publicly pressured to run the same playbook on 1,236 tons, that Italy is being pressured to run it on 43% of the world's third largest gold reserve, that the catalyst driving all of it is the 2022 Russian reserve freeze, which demonstrated that dollar-denominated assets in Western custody carry political counterparty risk that domestic physical gold does not carry, and that the last time France ran this playbook 60 years ago, it contributed directly to the collapse of the Bretton Woods monetary system that Nixon formalized by closing the gold window in 1971. The governor of the Banque de France said the decision was not politically motivated. Watch Germany. Watch the Bundesbank's quarterly statements. Watch the physical gold premium in the LBMA market. And understand that the question of whether 245 billion in German and Italian gold begins moving from New York to Frankfurt and Rome is not a geopolitical story or a technical gold market story. It is the question of whether the signal that France just sent is the beginning of a pattern or an isolated event. In 60 years of monetary history, France sending that signal has never been an isolated event. Most investors will not understand what France just told them. Now you do.